Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Sunday, the 7th of August. I'm Elon Aslan-Nevi, joining you live from Jerusalem. We open with breaking news as police conduct a manhunt in North Tel Aviv, reportedly for an Islamic Jihad terrorist from Jenin planning an attack. Rail services had previously been suspended around Bnei Brak. No confirmation yet from the police on the suspect's identity, and we'll bring in more information as we receive updates. Israeli officials have pushed back strongly against US President Barack Obama's claim that they now support the Iran nuclear deal. IBA's diplomatic correspondent, Kalev Ben-David, is here with the story. Kalev.
Thanks, Alon. Israel's view on the Iran nuclear deal remains unchanged. That was the message sent by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office after President Obama claimed that Israel's security establishment now views the Iran nuclear agreement it opposed as a game changer that has succeeded in halting Iran's progress toward atomic weapons. Obama's remarks also spurred a blistering response from the Israeli Defense Ministry, comparing the Iran deal to the 1938 Munich Agreement, in which Great Britain tried to appease Adolf Hitler to prevent war. That comparison echoes similar comments made by Avigdor Lieberman about the Iran deal prior to his becoming defense minister. The Prime Minister's office sought to soften the blow, reaffirming in its statement that Netanyahu firmly believes that Israel has no greater ally than the United States. Obama made his remarks while defending the Iran deal from new criticism that the U.S. essentially paid hostage ransom by returning $400 million in frozen funds back to Iran last January, on the same day the Islamic Republic released 5 U.S. citizens held prisoner there for various reasons.
The reason cash was exchanged is because we don't have a banking relationship with Iran, which is precisely part of the pressure that we were able to apply to them so that they would ship a whole bunch of nuclear material out and close down a bunch of facilities that, as I remember, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, was people's top fear and priority, that we make sure Iran doesn't have breakout nuclear capacity.
The U.S. payment to Iran has become an issue in the American presidential election, with Republican candidate Donald Trump at first claiming to have seen a video of the cash transfer and then backtracking on the claim. The Defense Ministry's harsh response to Obama has also stirred political reaction here in Israel, with Yair Lapid of the opposition Yesh Atid party saying Lieberman's statement was a combination of diplomatic irresponsibility and additional damage to Israel's relationship with the United States. Elon?
Thank you, Kalev. Joining us both now from Tel Aviv is former Deputy Foreign Minister and Ambassador to Washington, Danny Ayalon. Mr. Ayalon, welcome.
Thank you very much.
What was Lieberman thinking in comparing the Iran deal to the Munich Agreement?
Well, I don't think it was a very wise idea and wise choice of words. Very bad timing, as we are now, Israel and the United States are engaged in very intensive and sensitive talks towards hopefully the signature of the next 10 years defense cooperation.
In which case, unwise sounds like an understatement.
Yes, right. And what's more interesting is that, what was the purpose of it? The agreement has already been signed. So usually when you make a statement, when it comes to the political science and diplomacy, you have to have a purpose. And I don't see any purpose that was served.
Mr. Ayalon, Defense Minister Lieberman is a politician. There must have been a purpose behind his remarks. Can you speculate what that might have been?
Well, if this is the case, then we can see a pattern throughout his political career where really very narrow, self-serving political interests supersede national interests. And I think this was the case, and I think it was a good and prompt response from the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister to disassociate himself from this
So you see this as an attempt to get one up on the Prime Minister then?
Yes. Well, in any case, I think the lesson to all, especially to high-level politicians and statesmen and leaders, is to be more calculated, not to lose temper, and to really think before they speak.
Mr. Ambassador, Israel, of course, is negotiating this very sensitive military aid package now with the U.S. The Prime Minister seems to be gambling that if he carries on these negotiations and he doesn't get the deal he wants, he may get a better deal from the next occupant in the White House. I mean, how do you feel about this strategy?
Well, I think it's a too. I mean, too much is in stake. I think it's a very tall order to gamble on that, and the unpredictability is huge. I mean, if Hillary will be the next president, then I don't think. I mean, she will continue with the Obama's offer. I don't think there will be any change. With Trump in the White House, again, we do not know. I remember that just a few months ago, Mr. Trump said that Israel should pay for the defense assistance. He also said that the NATO countries, the U.S. will not come to their aid unless they pay or increase their payment to NATO. So I think this is taking a lot of risks, not signing it now, and hopefully this will be the case.
And what do you think about President Obama's claim that some Israeli security officials now look favorably on the Iran agreement? Is there any validity to this?
Well, near as I can tell, yes, some in the defense establishment, in the intelligence community do think that this agreement is not as calamitous as it has been called. But I don't think that it was the president's call to quote or relate to Israeli officials in order to justify this agreement. In my perspective is that this agreement is a bad agreement, and it could have been much better since Iran was on the verge of collapse. They needed the agreement much more than the P5+1 that negotiated against it.
Yeah, Mr. Ayalon, I want to rewind briefly to our discussion about the presidential candidates. You've had dealings with Hillary Clinton. How do you assess her stance on Israel in particular? And at this opportunity, have you met Mr. Trump and formed an impression on how he would handle Middle East issues specifically?
Well, Mr. Trump, I have met very briefly at the AIPAC conference just last March. With Hillary, I know her very well. I consider her a friend. We have worked very well when she was a senator in New York and I was ambassador in Washington. And then when I was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, she was the secretary. We also worked very closely. So I have no doubt that she will be a very good president, especially when it comes to Israel-U.S. relations. And she has Israel's back. She's also very smart, very experienced. So I'm not sure that she will put a lot in hopes to have any kind of breakthrough negotiating the deal with the Palestinians. And I'm sure that she will let the Palestinians come to the table on their own accord without trying to put international pressure on Israel. About Mr. Trump, again, I don't know, he made a reference that he could solve this problem in 6 months if he was really into it.
Wishful thinking, perhaps.
And to that, I would say that, you know, it's not a real estate deal, the conflict between us and the Palestinians. So he has no experience, he has no proven or track record. But I think that his heart is in the right place, and I think he's also a very good friend of Israel. And I think this is most important, is to keep the bipartisan support of Israel, which has been, I would say, frustrated in the last few years because of the Iran deal.
Mr. Ambassador, if I can just turn to another subject. You were very critical in government of the Turkish government of President Erdogan. How do you feel about the reconciliation agreement that Israel agreed to with Turkey?
Well, I'm for it. I definitely support it. I think, I mean, from a rational point of view, it's important. It's important for Israel. It's very important for Turkey. And the reason, and I hope this will continue without any interruptions following the failed coup in Turkey. About Erdogan himself, I still hold that he is an Islamist, an extreme Islamist, and we have, of course, to make sure that this agreement will be followed to the letter and the spirit by Turkey.
Mr. Ayalon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rabbi Michael Melchior, the chief rabbi of Norway and former Knesset member and Minister of Diaspora Affairs, said the day Israelis will be able to travel to Saudi Arabia is approaching and could happen very soon. His statements referred to a meeting with members of a Saudi delegation who visited Jerusalem and Ramallah last month. Melchior made the comments during a conference call with British media hosted by the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Centre last week. Melchior said his meetings focused on religious issues that related to diplomacy between the two countries. The drone that successfully infiltrated Israel and escaped 3 attempts to shoot it down over the Golan Heights 3 weeks ago was Russian. Moscow claimed to Israel that one of its drones operating in Syria had mistakenly crossed the frontier as a result of human error. The Haaretz Daily said that the drone penetrated 4 kilometers into Israeli airspace and speculated that it could have been a bid to gather intelligence or see how Israel's air defense system responded. The Air Force fired 2 Patriot missiles, which missed, and scrambled a warplane, which also fired a missile, but that missed as well, as the drone escaped unscathed. The incident was reportedly the main subject of a telephone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Israel and Russia have set up a coordination channel to prevent the risk of confrontation between the IDF and the Russian military stationed in Syria to help the Assad regime. Australia and Germany announced they were suspending all funding to the World Vision charity group after the Shin Bet security agency revealed that Mohammed Halabi, a senior employee of the humanitarian aid organization, was arrested for allegedly funneling some $50 million of the charity's funds to Hamas in Gaza. Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade called the allegations deeply troubling and said it was suspending further funding until an investigation is completed. A spokesman for World Vision announced that the 3.6 million euros it receives from Germany will also be suspended until further notice. The Shin Bet said Halabi siphoned off funds from the charity's coffers, which were intended as humanitarian aid in Gaza. He allegedly tried to hide his activities by submitting inflated receipts and falsely listing Hamas operatives as workers on World Vision projects.
Another great tragedy here is that Israelis will now be skeptical towards aid organizations because of the cynicism and cruelty of Hamas, which instead of allowing money to flow to the civilians that needed it, used that money to build a war machine to attack Israelis.
Hundreds of Palestinian security prisoners affiliated with Hamas ended their hunger strike over the weekend, saying prison authorities had agreed to end, quote, humiliating body searches and return detainees transferred elsewhere back to their original jails. This was denied by prison authorities, who said no concessions had been made to Hamas prisoners. Several dozen other prisoners affiliated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, who began fasting last week, vowed to continue refusing food in solidarity with detainees who have been fasting to protest their detentions without trial. Israel says administrative detention allows the authorities to hold suspects while continuing to gather evidence against them. The step has been harshly criticized by human rights groups. In 2010, tour guide Kay Wilson was stabbed 13 times by a Hamas terrorist with a machete in a horrific attack in which her friend Christine Lucan was killed. I spoke to her to discuss how she, as a terror survivor, reacts to the reception of convicted terrorists in Palestinian society.
معنا في بداية هذه الحلقة والدة الأسير البطل كفاح غنيمات المحكوم مدى الحياة معتقل منذ 10 أعوام يعطيك.
The terrorist who stabbed you and murdered your friend was recently honored on Palestinian Authority television, where he was called a hero. What goes through your mind when you see things like this?
I find it obscene, and I always rhetorically ask what causes, somebody like the relatives to react like that. Obviously killing Jews, or, well, Christine wasn't Jewish. It's a huge sense of injustice, raging really, which for me personally is compounded when I see like the country club prison conditions that are awarded these cold-blooded murders by our own government.
On the question specifically of the stipends that the Palestinian Authority provides terrorists and their families, from your experience speaking on this issue, have you found the international community responsive at all on this outrage?
On the political echelon, no, absolute disinterest. It's American and European taxpayers' monies that are funding these murderers.
How do you expect foreign governments to act in putting an end to these payments?
I would expect a closer monitoring of where this financial aid goes to. That would be one thing, not just a generic giving to the Palestinian Authority. And of course, look, It's not rocket science. You look around and you look at their infrastructure, you look and see societies that are barren of museums and play parks, and that's because they squander the money. So just an inspection into what's going on with
foreign governments say that they give grants towards specific projects, and money is fungible, of course, which means, as far as they say, they're not directly funding the Palestinian prisoners' payments. What can they do then, given their interest in supporting the Palestinian Authority in any case?
Well, if I was God or the Prime Minister, which I will never be, I would absolutely not allow any funds to go to the Palestinian Authority. I'd make an account. I'd say you receive billions, absolutely billions, until you stop the incitement of terrorism. We are not interested in funding your infrastructure of murder.
Earlier this year, you spoke to the UN Human Rights Council, and you had this to say.
The United Nations Human Rights Council immorally whitewashes terrorism as helplessness and frustration. As a survivor, I know that to be shackled in perpetual victimhood is not kind, helpful, moral or true. Personally, I've not also taken out my frustrations by holding Arabs hostage, tying them up and hacking them to death.
Did you find the UN Human Rights Council responsive at all to your message?
Let me answer with a touch of humour and irony. Human rights has to be in inverted commas. No, I didn't expect that either. It was basically, you sit through 8 hours of hatred against Israel. I certainly didn't expect any reception from them, but it was said, and it's on record, it's in the media, and that's why it was important for me to do that.
Did you not feel you received any sort of human response from the diplomats sitting in the hall?
No, none whatsoever. In fact, I had the last word that day, which was kind of redemptive in a way. But as I got up to leave, I mean, it was like the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, nobody wanted to go near me except for NGO Monitor, who facilitated that, and the other Israeli organisations there. But no, on a diplomatic level, I believe it just all falls on deaf ears. You know, you talk about human rights. What about the rights for the victims?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Last week, we reported the footage of a Palestinian father pushing his child towards border policemen and daring them to shoot him. After Amnesty International declined to comment, Human Rights Watch replied to IBA's request for a statement. It said that since it had not authenticated or investigated the footage, it cannot reach definitive conclusions about the events. A spokesman added, however, that international law strictly forbids the use of force in policing contexts, and noted that the footage indeed shows Israeli soldiers lowering their weapons as the child approaches. Health Minister Yaakov Litzman is threatening to revoke the production line license of Unilever Israel after it emerged that hundreds of boxes of cereal contaminated with salmonella had reached supermarket shelves. The company is warning customers to return cornflakes of Champions, cornflakes Badats and Cocoa Mantz Dafim bearing certain serial numbers as a precaution. This after originally claiming that infected cereals had never reached the public. Unilever now claims it informed the health ministry about the suspected contamination immediately. Itzik Shmuli, chair of the Knesset lobby for the promotion of safety, called for an inquiry into possible criminal negligence. On Tuesday, legislators will be recalled from their summer recess for an urgent meeting of the Knesset State Control Committee to seek an inquiry into the apparent failure of the health ministry to prevent the distribution of the contaminated foods. 2 Israeli hikers were among 4 killed in a mountain climbing accident on Mount Ushba in Georgia. The bodies of Boris Gorfinkel, 46, of Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, and Michael Levant, 46, of Modi'in, were discovered on the mountain by a team of local rescue workers on Friday evening. Gorfinkel, a high school teacher, is survived by his wife and 2 daughters, and Levant, an engineer, is survived by his wife and 3 children. Contact with the 2 was lost last Thursday, and the Israeli insurance company Magnus notified. They contacted local emergency teams in Georgia, who located the dead hikers. Some 200 visitors to Masada, the ancient fortification situated on an isolated rock plateau, were bussed down to the visitors' centre yesterday and others flown by helicopter, after the cable car at the site stopped operating due to an apparent technical malfunction. The cable car was empty at the time of the malfunction, but left hundreds of visitors stranded on the desert hilltop. Buses were sent as well as a helicopter which transferred the elderly and handicapped down the mountaintop. Some of the tourists opted to descend the mountain via the snake path. Officials at the national park said a technician from Switzerland had been called in to repair the cable car, noting it would remain closed until further notice. The large majority of visitors to the site use the cable car, and until it is fixed, visitors can ascend via the snake path, which will be closed from 9 o'clock in the morning due to the intense summer heat. Drilling will resume at the Tamar natural gas field at the cost of $265 million. The new drilling at Tamar 8 will take place some 100 kilometers west offshore from Haifa at a depth of 1.7 kilometers. It will be conducted by the drilling ship Atwood Advantage, which has a crew of 100. During the drilling, pipes and valves will be placed in order to connect the new well to Tamar's underwater production system off the coast of Ashkelon. As the Olympics kick off this week, here are 5 good news stories to put a leap in your stride to. Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot was awarded the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious service in a surprise ceremony outside the Pentagon. Ethiopian-born Damas Pakada, whose assault by Israeli police officers last year sparked mass protests against anti-Ethiopian racism, is now an IDF officer, having completed training last week. Israeli company Trek Ace has produced a navigational sleeve that gives the user real-time directions based on a predefined route through the use of sensory stimulation. A delegation of 35 Jewish fashionistas from abroad got an exclusive peek at Israeli fashion designs during a private runway event in Jaffa last week. Their trip to Israel was sponsored by the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and the American-based Jewish Women's Renaissance Project. And finally, Bezek is teaming up with the Modi'in municipality to build the country's first smart city, connecting lighting, parking and rubbish collection to a system of central digital management. High-tech nation indeed. In finance, shares are starting the week up on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and currency markets are still closed for the weekend. In weather, no change tomorrow, highs of 30 degrees in Tel Aviv and 28 in Jerusalem. And that's all for today. We'll be back again tomorrow. For me and the IBA team, it's a good evening and a fantastic week, live from Jerusalem.